Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most baffling and overlooked enigmas in human history, a place so ancient, so otherworldly that it shouldn't even exist. A temple buried in the sands of time, on purpose. Older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older even than agriculture. Welcome to Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple on Earth and one of its greatest mysteries. So before we start peeling back the layers of forgotten history, do me a favor, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find yourself intrigued by the strange and the ancient. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always eerie and beautiful to think of all of us scattered across the world, exploring the past together in the present. Now dim the lights, maybe brew a warm drink, or let that white noise machine hum in the background. Because what we're about to explore is older than myth, older than writing, and it changes everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization. Imagine this. You're standing on a barren hill in southeastern Turkey. The air is dry. The landscape is windswept and empty. To the naked eye, there's nothing remarkable here. Just a dusty mound rising out of the plains. You could walk right over it and never know. And for thousands of years, people did just that. But buried beneath your feet is something impossible. Massive stone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons. Arranged in perfect circles, carved with images of animals, foxes, vultures, snakes, wild boars. Not just simple stick figures. These carvings are precise, stylized, symbolic. Some of the stones are shaped like abstract human forms with hands, belts, and loincloths. They stand upright like silent sentinels, watching over something we still don't fully understand. And here's the kicker. All of it. This entire sprawling temple complex was built over 11,000 years ago. Let that sink in. Göbekli Tepe was constructed around 9600 B.C.E. That's before agriculture, before pottery, before the wheel. That's before cities, before writing, before just about everything we associate with civilization. And yet, they built this. Massive T-shaped pillars weighing dozens of tons, arranged in concentric circles with symbolic art etched into them. And they didn't just build it, they buried it, deliberately, covering the entire complex in layers of earth as if they were trying to hide it from time itself. Why? Who were these people? How did they do it? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what did they know that we don't? When Göbekli Tepe was first excavated in the 1990s by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, it sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Because according to everything we thought we knew, this place shouldn't exist. Back then, humans were supposed to be hunter-gatherers, nomadic, living in small, scattered groups. Survival was the goal, not religion, not architecture, not massive stone monuments. But Göbekli Tepe turns that idea upside down. Because what it suggests is this: before we settled down to farm, before we invented the plow or domesticated animals, we built temples. We gathered, we worshipped, we carved symbols into stone. In other words, maybe it wasn't farming that gave birth to civilization. Maybe it was belief. Think about that for a second. What if religion didn't arise because people had extra time after they settled in villages? What if religion, spirituality, ritual, myth was the reason they gathered in the first place? Göbekli Tepe forces us to reconsider the very foundation of human society. It whispers from beneath the soil that something older, deeper, and stranger drove us to become who we are. And yet, for thousands of years, this place remained hidden. The people who built it covered it up intentionally, methodically, before abandoning it entirely. No one knows why. There are no signs of war, no fire, no collapse. Just silence. Layer after layer of carefully packed earth and rubble, preserving these ancient stones like a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time. A message that says, "We were here, and we knew something you forgot." Now, let's talk about how this thing was built, because it's not just old, it's almost impossibly sophisticated for the time. Picture a group of people, tribes maybe, gathering on this hill 11,600 years ago. They don't have metal tools, no cranes, no wheels, and yet somehow they cut, moved, and erected 20 tons limestone pillars, not once, not twice, but over and over for generations, creating circular enclosures that required careful planning, advanced understanding of weight distribution, and precise positioning. Archaeologists still don't know how they did it. Some theories suggest they used sleds and manpower. Maybe they carved the stones in nearby quarries and dragged them across the land. But no matter how you slice it, this wasn't a weekend project. This was organized, sustained, and deeply meaningful. And it raises another question. What belief system was so powerful, so important, that it inspired people with no cities, no farms, and no permanent homes to come together and build something that would outlast empires? Because Göbekli Tepe wasn't a village. People didn't live here full-time. There are no ovens, no trash pits, no houses. This was a sacred space, a destination, a place of pilgrimage. And that gives us a glimpse into something hauntingly familiar. Even in our earliest days, humans sought connection with the divine. We gathered around symbols, built sanctuaries, told stories with stone. But there's another layer to this mystery that's easy to miss. Most of the carvings at Göbekli Tepe are animals, but not just random animals. Many of them are dangerous: snakes, scorpions, wild boars, lions. They seem to swirl around the central pillars like guardians or perhaps warnings. Some scholars believe these carvings represent myths, constellations, or shamanic visions. Others go further, much further. There's a theory, still fringe but fascinating, that Göbekli Tepe encodes astronomical knowledge, that some of the carvings correspond to star constellations as they would have appeared in the sky around 10,000 B.C.E., which would mean someone, somehow, tracked the heavens with stunning precision. And if that's true, we have to ask the unthinkable. How did people with no written language, no telescopes, no cities, develop this knowledge? Did they inherit it? Were they taught? Or did they simply know something we've forgotten? What Göbekli Tepe suggests, quietly, insistently, is that the story of human history might be far older and far stranger than we've been led to believe.
The thing about Göbekli Tepe is, it doesn't just whisper mystery, it shouts it. Quietly, politely, but insistently, from every carved stone and buried chamber. The deeper you dig, the more it laughs in the face of everything we thought we knew about the birth of civilization. So let's dig a little deeper. Because while the site itself is mind-blowing, the timeline is what really twists the knife in our collective understanding. Remember, this place was active over 11,000 years ago, during what historians call the pre-pottery Neolithic. That's a fancy way of saying they didn't even have pots yet. No kilns, no farming tools, no bronze, no writing. Yet somehow, in a time when most humans were still chasing antelope with pointy sticks, the builders of Göbekli Tepe were carving elaborate stone temples with artistic detail and architectural genius. It's like finding a smartphone in a pharaoh's tomb. Something doesn't quite add up. But it's not just the when that's confusing. It's the why. Because Göbekli Tepe wasn't practical. It wasn't built for shelter or food or defense. It was spiritual, ceremonial. That's the part archaeologists agree on. This was a place people traveled to, not lived in. A sacred destination that may have drawn groups from across the region. And that raises a haunting possibility. Maybe it wasn't agriculture that created religion. Maybe it was religion that created agriculture. Stay with me. We used to believe that humans first settled down to farm, and then, with full bellies and spare time, they invented religion. It was a byproduct, a luxury. But Göbekli Tepe flips that idea on its head. What if our desire to gather, to share myths, to connect with the divine, that came first? What if we started growing food, not because we had to, but because we needed to feed the workers building our first temples? In other words, it wasn't crops that built temples. It was temples that built crops. That's not just poetic, it's paradigm shifting. And it gets stranger. The people who built Göbekli Tepe went through unimaginable effort to quarry, move, and erect these colossal stones. They shaped T-shaped monoliths that appear humanoid, broad-shouldered, upright, almost godlike. Some have arms, fingers, belts, even loincloths. They weren't just stacking rocks. They were making something meaningful. Something that suggests they understood identity, symbolism, perhaps even the divine. And yet, they left no names, no writing, no king lists, no personal inscriptions. They left only stone, massive, quiet, unknowable stone. And just when you think it couldn't get any weirder, they buried it. That's right. At some point, centuries after it was built, the people of Göbekli Tepe systematically filled the entire complex with dirt and debris, carefully, deliberately, like they were tucking it into bed, and then they left. Not in a hurry, not from catastrophe, no signs of war, no fire, just silence, as if their job was done. Why? Some believe they buried it to protect it. Others think it marked an end of a ritual cycle, a ceremonial closure. Still others whispered darker theories about forgotten knowledge, cosmic alignments, or the need to seal something away. Something that was never meant to be uncovered. And yet, here we are. Let's talk for a moment about the carvings. They're everywhere at Göbekli Tepe. Dozens of animals, foxes, snakes, lions, vultures, insects. And they're not random. These creatures seem to follow patterns, themes, stories. Some researchers believe the carvings represent a zodiac, a symbolic map of the stars. One controversial paper even suggests that a specific carving at Göbekli Tepe might depict a comet impact around 10,900 B.C.E., possibly connected to the Younger Dryas, a mysterious mini-ice age that reshaped the climate and may have wiped out megafauna. If that's true, if they were tracking celestial events over 12,000 years ago, then we're looking at an astronomical knowledge that predates any written record by thousands of years. We're talking ancient sky watchers, star priests, Proto-astronomers mapping the heavens not from cities, but from circles of stone. And now it starts to sound eerily familiar, because across the world, in ancient Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in Mesopotamia, in the Andes, we see the same obsession. Stone aligned to stars, temples echoing the cosmos, societies rooted not just in survival, but in sacred geometry. And Göbekli Tepe? It's the oldest of them all. The prototype, the first blueprint. Which brings us to an unsettling question. Was Göbekli Tepe a one-off, a freak outlier of Stone Age ingenuity? Or was it part of something older, deeper, now lost? Because the truth is, we've only excavated about 5% of the site. Let me say that again. Only 5%. That's like finding the corner of a jigsaw puzzle and thinking you've seen the whole picture. We don't know what lies beneath the rest of the hill. We don't know how many more enclosures, pillars, or chambers are still waiting. And we don't know who built it. Not really. We call them hunter-gatherers, but that label doesn't fit anymore. These people weren't just chasing deer and berries. They were engineers, artists, thinkers, the kind of people who planned for seasons, read the stars, and carried stories in stone. We have no idea what they called themselves, but their stones still stand, and they're not alone. Because since the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, similar sites have begun to surface. Karahan Tepe, Nivali Kori, Chioni, all within the same region of southeastern Turkey, all older than we thought possible, all whispering the same strange message. There was something here, something organized, something sacred, something forgotten, and yet strangely familiar. Maybe because the idea of gathering around a shared story, of carving meaning into the earth, of building monuments to the unknown, that's always been human. It's in our bones. We've always wanted to touch the sky, even if it meant dragging a 20-ton stone across a barren hill to do it. So now the question isn't just, what was Göbekli Tepe? It's, what else was out there before the flood of history washed it all away? Because what if this site is not the beginning of civilization, but the remnant of an even older world, a world that knew things, a world that watched the sky, a world that built with meaning and then disappeared.
Let's go back to the dirt, the silence, the hill. Because the more we uncover Göbekli Tepe, the clearer it becomes it wasn't alone. Like the lone opening note of a forgotten song, it turns out this site was part of something bigger, a network, a pattern, a memory half buried across an entire region. Roughly 35 kilometers away lies another hill, smaller, less famous, but just as eerie, Karahan Tepe. At first glance, Karahan Tepe looks like a younger sibling. It doesn't have the towering circular enclosures, the big sweeping vistas of Göbekli Tepe. But what it does have? A chamber, carved straight into the bedrock, lined with stone heads, human-like faces, blank, emotionless, staring into eternity. And in the center of the chamber, a single, phallic pillar rises from the floor. No base, just emerging, like it grew there, like it was always part of the earth. You stand in that chamber surrounded by a dozen eyes of stone, all watching this one impossible shape. And even if you're not the superstitious type, something in you whispers, this meant something. Karahan Tepe is younger by only a few hundred years, give or take, which means it overlaps with Göbekli Tepe, not just chronologically, but culturally. The same tool types, the same architectural habits, the same obsession with animal carvings and T-shaped pillars, the same eerie silence. No written records, no graves, no names, just stone. The thing is, sites like these keep popping up, quietly, in the shadows of Göbekli Tepe's fame. Nivali Chori, now sadly lost beneath a dam, had similar T-shaped pillars and artistic motifs before Göbekli Tepe was even uncovered. Chayoni, Sefer Tepe, Cyberch, all scattered across southeastern Anatolia, all older than what anyone thought was possible. It's like finding a trail of breadcrumbs across time, each one whispering, "We were here too." And suddenly, it's no longer a mystery on a hilltop. It's a lost chapter of humanity, an entire civilization that predates the wheel. Let that simmer for a moment. We don't like that word civilization for anything pre-agriculture, but what else would you call this? Dozens of interconnected ritual sites, shared architectural styles, a symbolic language carved into stone, coordinated labor, trade routes, pilgrimage paths, ceremonies. It wasn't a city, not exactly. It was something older, something stranger, a spiritual complex scattered across the land like constellations mirroring the stars. And here's the part that really twists the knife. Most of these sites, Göbekli Tepe included, were buried on purpose. That's not erosion. That's not a sandstorm. That's intentional infill. Tons of it, moved by hand, packed carefully, almost respectfully. This wasn't abandonment. It was entombment. And if that doesn't give you goosebumps, consider this. Why bury something that took generations to build? Why erase your greatest achievement? You don't bury a temple because you're bored with it. You bury it because it's dangerous, or sacred, or both. There's one theory, still fringe, but growing louder, that says Göbekli Tepe was sealed to protect it. Not from looters, but from time, from change, maybe even from memory. Because the people who covered it weren't the ones who built it. That's the elephant in the room. Quiet, ominous, patient. We don't know who built Göbekli Tepe. We just know who buried it. And that's a huge difference. Now let's pull the lens back a bit. Because while Anatolia holds the bones, there are strange echoes of this mystery scattered across the globe. Let's go west, to the megalithic temples of Malta, Hajarkim, and Marindra, built from massive limestone blocks and aligned perfectly with the solstices, dated to around 3600 B.C.E. That's young compared to Göbekli Tepe, but still oddly similar. T-shaped altars, spirals, carvings, ritual chambers, and no known precursors. It's like someone just started building temples out of nowhere. Sound familiar? Now let's go east, to India, where the Birana site shows evidence of permanent settlement and symbolic design going back 7500 BCE. Further east still, in China, ancient sites like Jiahu, 9,000 years old, show ritual burials, proto-writing, and bone flutes. And further south, in Peru, there's Caral, another mysterious city that rose from the desert thousands of years ago, with pyramids, ceremonial plazas, and no signs of war, just music, trade, and astronomical alignment. All of them, these early sites, seem to appear out of the fog of prehistory fully formed, not as crude shelters, but as sanctuaries. As if the first instinct of humanity wasn't to build homes, but to build temples. And now the question shifts, not how did they do it, but why do we keep finding the same pattern? Stone, symbol, star, over and over again. Göbekli Tepe is the oldest we found, but what if it's not the first? What if it's a copy, a memory, a reboot? Because here's where things get weird. Some of the carvings at Göbekli Tepe are so stylized, so clean, so deliberate, that they don't look like first tries. They look like the result of a tradition, an artistic lineage, one that we haven't found yet, one that might have existed before the last ice age ended. Which brings us to the rising tide of another theory, not published in peer-reviewed journals, but whispered through documentaries, fringe forums, and ancient texts. What if humanity once reached a level of organization, of complexity, long before the official dawn of civilization? What if we lost it? What if Göbekli Tepe is a monument to memory, a last outpost of a forgotten world? Now, to be clear, there's no definitive evidence of a lost high-tech civilization. No lasers, no flying cars buried under the silt. But what we do have is absence. The absence of a clear origin. The absence of a progression. And the chilling presence of advanced organization at a time when we're told we were still living in caves. Which begs the question, did something happen? A catastrophe? A flood? A shift so massive that the survivors chose not to rebuild, but to bury, to seal away their greatest temple, to scatter their knowledge like seeds, and to vanish. Until one day, thousands of years later, a German archaeologist with a trowel brushed away the dirt, and history blinked.
You'd think by now, after all the dirt, stone, and buried pillars, we'd start getting answers. But that's the thing about Göbekli Tepe. The more you stare into it, the more it stares back. And just like the vultures and foxes carved into the walls, it doesn't blink. Let's talk about those carvings. Because the animals, they're not just decoration. They're deliberate, consistent, and weirdly, thematic. Across the T-shaped pillars, we see a parade of creatures, vultures with outstretched wings, coiling snakes, scorpions, wild boars, foxes, ducks. And they're not all friendly forest friends. Many of them are dangerous, predators, carrion eaters, creatures that don't belong in your average prehistoric petting zoo. So what were they doing here? Some researchers think these animals represent local wildlife, a kind of Neolithic National Geographic. But that feels thin, too literal. Because these animals aren't just floating randomly across the stone. They're grouped, positioned, facing specific directions. Some are stacked, layered like narrative panels. This wasn't doodling, it was symbolic. Take the vulture. At Göbekli Tepe, vultures appear often, standing tall, wings spread wide, sometimes carrying circular objects, maybe heads. And here's where it gets interesting. In nearby Neolithic cultures, vultures were associated with sky burials, a ritual where the dead were left out for carrion birds to clean the bones. It wasn't seen as grotesque, it was sacred, a form of excarnation, a way to free the soul. So now, the vulture isn't just a bird, it's a psychopomp, a creature that ferries the dead to the afterlife, which means Göbekli Tepe might not just be a temple. It might be a place of death, a place of transformation, somewhere between earth and sky, flesh and spirit. And now those T-shaped pillars take on a darker tone, because they're not just shaped like humans. They are humans, or gods, or ancestors. They stand in the center of each circle like guardians, arms carved at their sides, belts cinched around their waists, and always facing the same direction, north. Toward what? We don't know, but it wasn't random. And here's where we dive headfirst into the rabbit hole. Because some scholars, especially those with a penchant for sky maps and forbidden history, have suggested that Göbekli Tepe is more than just a temple. It's a calendar, a cosmic map, a stone-bound story of the stars. In 2017, a controversial study argued that a particular pillar, Pillar 43, also called the Vulture Stone, might record an astronomical event, a comet impact that triggered the Younger Dryas, a sudden deep freeze that changed the climate and wiped out entire species. It claimed the animal carvings weren't just symbolic, they were zodiacal, constellations. Scorpio, Leo, Ophiuchus, mapped with stunning accuracy to the night sky as it would have appeared in 10,950 B.C.E. If that's true, and that's a big if,
then someone at Göbekli Tepe wasn't just carving animals for fun. They were recording cosmic trauma. They were remembering an event that shattered their world. And that might explain the burial, the urgency, the ritual silence. Because what if Göbekli Tepe wasn't just built to worship the gods, but to appease them? Or worse, to warn us. Now, before we spiral too deep into ancient apocalypse territory, let's ground ourselves. Because even if the vulture stone isn't an ancient star map, there's still something unmistakably ritualistic about this place. The circles, the symmetry, the repetition. This wasn't chaos. This was order. And yet here's the twist. It wasn't domestic. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a village. It had no homes, no hearths, no garbage pits. It was all ritual, no residence. A sacred site people traveled to, likely on foot, over long distances. Which means this entire complex, miles of stone and sweat, was built by people who didn't live here. They gathered, they carved, they worshipped, and then they left. And they did it over and over again. Generations of pilgrims, builders, dreamers, all contributing to something they'd never own. Which means the people of Göbekli Tepe weren't just thinking about seasons or survival. They were thinking about legacy, about death, about the afterlife, about things that couldn't be hunted, cooked, or buried in a pouch. They were thinking about meaning. That's what hits hardest. Because we tend to picture prehistoric humans as barely scraping by, clinging to life, grunting their way through existence. But Göbekli Tepe says something else. It says, we remembered. We carved our myths into the earth. We shaped the sacred with stone. We built circles, not walls. And that's not the act of desperation. That's the act of hope. Now zoom back out again. This isn't just one site. This is the first domino. Because after Göbekli Tepe came agriculture, then pottery, then metallurgy, then cities. It's almost like we needed a temple before we could build a town. As if gathering for something higher gave us the blueprint to build something greater. And that reorders everything we thought we knew. Religion didn't follow farming. It might have caused it. Temples didn't come after surplus. They might have been the reason we created surplus in the first place. Not to feed our bellies, but to feed our spirits. And here's where the story turns personal. Because in a way, we've never stopped building Göbekli Tepes. Cathedrals, mosques, monasteries, megachurches, even the digital kind, online temples made of ones and zeros where people gathered to share belief, identity, meaning. We are still builders of sacred circles. We still reach for the sky. And every time we do, we echo something carved into the limestone of a forgotten hill 11,600 years ago. A whisper from the past. You were more than flesh. You were memory.
Let's take a moment to step back, not just from Göbekli Tepe, but from everything. From the carved pillars and animal glyphs, from buried enclosures and haunting silence. Let's ask the big question. Why does this matter? Why does an ancient temple on a dusty hill in Turkey, built by people we can't name, for reasons we can't fully explain, deserve this much attention? Because Göbekli Tepe is more than an archaeological oddity. It's a mirror, a time-bent reflection of what we once were, and what we might still be. And more importantly, it may be the missing link between myth and history. Let's talk about myths for a second. Flood myths, to be exact. Because scattered across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to Noah's Ark, we hear the same eerie tale. There was once a great flood. It came suddenly. It destroyed everything. Only a few survived, guided by the gods or warned in dreams. And when the waters receded, civilization began anew. We've chalked this up to allegory, cultural storytelling, a way to explain cyclical destruction or seasonal rains. But Göbekli Tepe puts a crack in that assumption, because it dates to just after the Younger Dryas, a mysterious climatic event that ended around 9600 BCE. It was sudden, violent, global, and it marked a hard reset on the planet's weather systems. Glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, species vanished, and humans changed. We went from scattered hunter-gatherers to settled communities in a blink of geological time. What caused it? Some say it was a natural cycle. Others point to a comet impact, comet debris slamming into the Earth and triggering chaos. If that sounds far-fetched, remember, we're standing on a temple that shouldn't exist. So, let's follow the logic. Imagine you were there. You watched the sky darken, the temperature plummet, herds die, rivers rise, the world unravel. You survived, and you remembered. Would you not tell your children? Would you not carve warnings into stone? Would you not build monuments to commemorate the dead, or plead with the gods to never let it happen again? Maybe that's what Göbekli Tepe is. Not just a temple, but a response. A spiritual insurance policy, a contract with the cosmos, a message that says, we saw, we learned, we remember. And that might be why so many myths echo the same themes. Flood, fire, divine punishment, sacred knowledge lost and later rediscovered. Because maybe, just maybe, they're not myths after all. Maybe they're memories. Distorted by time, wrapped in allegory, but real. And Göbekli Tepe is the archaeological breadcrumb that connects those stories to the soil. But there's another layer here, one we haven't touched yet. The builders. Who were they? And perhaps more importantly, what happened to them? Because after spending centuries, maybe millennia, creating this sacred complex, they stopped. They buried everything, and then vanished. There's no clear successor culture, no direct descendants. It's not like the Egyptians who handed things off to the Greeks who passed the torch to the Romans. This is a cold trail, one that ends with a shovelful of dirt. And yet, echoes of Göbekli Tepe are everywhere. In the standing stones of Karnak, France, in the stone rings of Nabta Playa deep in the Egyptian desert, in the myths of Atlantis and the sons of the gods, in the idea that before the rise of cities came something older, something spiritual, which raises one last haunting possibility. What if the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't the beginning, but the end? The last embers of a dying flame, a knowledge passed down, distorted, fading. What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't the first monument to the sacred, but the last memory of something deeper? We think of history as a straight line: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Internet. But maybe it's not a line. Maybe it's a cycle. Rise, fall, remember, forget. Göbekli Tepe might be a fingerprint from the last time we remembered. A message in a bottle tossed forward 12,000 years, hoping someone would find it and ask the same questions we're asking now. And if that's true, then the burial wasn't just about hiding something, it was about preserving it, sealing it for a future generation that would one day be ready to listen. And here we are, listening. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, one more thread that ties it all together. It's not stone, it's not animal carvings, it's not star charts or flood myths. It's something simpler. It's the circle.
Each enclosure at Göbekli Tepe is round. That's not an accident. That's symbolic. A circle has no beginning, no end. It represents time, eternity, the cosmos, the sacred. And it appears again and again in human history. Stonehenge, mandalas, medicine wheels, Celtic knots. The circle is humanity's first symbol. And Göbekli Tepe is one giant, sacred circle of circles. Maybe that's what this whole site was trying to teach us. Not just how to remember, but how to begin again. Not with war, not with kings, but with story, with myth, with meaning carved in stone. Because long before we built cities or wrote laws, we built circles. We gathered, we looked up, we asked why. And maybe that's the most human thing of all.
So here we are, at the end of our journey, at the edge of a buried temple that still pulses with unanswered questions, at the beginning of something older than civilization itself. Let's stand one more time on that hilltop in southeastern Turkey. No noise, no cities, just stone, sky, and silence. The circles still sleep beneath the earth. The pillars still reach up like hands frozen in prayer. And the wind whispers through the dust, carrying a message written in the only language that lasts: monumental silence. But this isn't just about Göbekli Tepe anymore. It's about us. Because what this site shows, more than tools, more than timelines, is something deeply, unmistakably human. We've always longed for something beyond ourselves. Before money, before governments, before borders and battles and business plans, we gathered to share stories, to bury the dead, to carve our questions into the bones of the earth. And isn't that what we're still doing? We don't use limestone pillars anymore. Now we use data, satellites, Wi-Fi. But the impulse is the same. We're still building temples. We just call them networks now. But deep down, we're still haunted by the same questions the builders of Göbekli Tepe must have asked. Why are we here? What lies beyond the stars? What happens after we die? Who or what is watching? And maybe, just maybe, we've been carrying those questions across the ages like torches, each generation adding its own sparks to the fire. Göbekli Tepe is one of those sparks, a flare from the past that reminds us you are part of something ancient. Not just bloodlines, not just tools, but meaning. That's what this temple was. A sanctuary of meaning. A place where people once stood and said, we are more than what we see. Now let's talk about the burial one last time. Because if you bury something to protect it, you expect it to be found again. Not tomorrow, not next year, maybe not even in your lifetime, but someday. So maybe that's what Göbekli Tepe really is. A time capsule, not of objects, but of consciousness. And we found it. We're the ones who pulled back the soil, who saw the vultures and foxes, who decoded the symbols, argued over alignments, whispered about floods and stars and forgotten gods. We're the ones who remembered. And maybe that was the point all along.